Good. Hi. Hello, everybody. What an honor it is for me to sit next to the big guys of Indian VFX, Indian animation, Biren. No, I don't mean it by the girth of that we have developed over the last 20 years. I mean by the volume of work and the impact that Biren and Ashish have had. And since we have, we don't have much time, I really want to dive in and really ask both of you. You've been around for decades now, working in this and pushing the India story globally. As far as front-end work is concerned, which is a big one, big dream for all of us. If both of you could begin with what is your dream for India?
Actually, my dream for India is to really see that we have level playing field for creative arts and performing arts and design along with science and commerce is the first one. Second thing is that it's, it's important that we look at a kind of a balance that would come in whereby there is an understanding into the education ecosystem, the skilling ecosystem, the policy ecosystem, and also look at, the parents finally allowing their kids to make a career with the creative arts and performing arts and design. So truly speaking, I think these are few critical dreams that we are carrying, and I think all our work is centered around these dreams.
Right. So the front end almost still needs a lot of work at the back end that we need to do on our part, I guess. What about you, Biren?
So the wonderful thing about being in this industry is that we get the chance to renew our dreams very often. When we were starting out, we were wondering, when we can make a great movie that will be seen by everyone in the world. When can we make an entire visual effects movie of the size of a Lion King in one studio from front to end? Right. Is it possible for us to get the hundreds of artists that work in the movie to win an Oscar? Is it, so the list can go on, but those dreams fortunately got realized quite soon over the last 10 years' time. And therefore, I think all of us need to continue to dream bigger.
To dream more.
I think the dream now is that while we are seeing, and we'll talk about this during the course, I think, of this conversation, I think the topic is really interesting because it says front end just means leading, something that leads something else, right? And I think every element of that chain is valuable. The dreams that we have for what we consider the simpler stuff that we do in the 12 or 14 different skill sets we have in the visual effects business have been realized. I would argue that 70-80% or more of all the roto prep and match move work in the world has come into India already. Now, how do we look beyond that at assets, at compositing, at animation, at lighting, and make that happen? Right. And then finally, in order for us to be truly end-to-end, the things that we talked about and saw on the screen today that people have already started doing, using the learnings from the West and bringing them to the East, things like fur and water and effects and groom and stuff like that, I think then completes the suite. New tools will come, new dreams will come with that, but I think we're going to talk about this a little bit more. How does that really happen? But I think the dreams are a constantly evolving version 3, version 5, version 7 story. I'd also like to say that while he introduced us as a luminary in this industry, Jesh is a quiet, silent, amazing founder. There are two kinds of people who start, right? There are founders and flounders. So he definitely belongs to the first category. He's in the front end of that business himself. Yeah.
No, and you bring up a very important point that I'm going to throw back at both of you, is that the front end is actually about controlling every end, including the VFX supervision part of it, which is a big one for us. And how do you see that, Biren, at MPC and Technicolor? How is that kind of working for you?
So, in every industry, 65 or 70% of what anyone learns is learnt on the job. Right. In our industry, currently, if I look back over till now, 95% is learnt on the job. And I think one of the things that we'll talk about in the conversation, and Ashish has been a very great champion of that on the learning side in the larger ecosystem. And we've done a lot of work, I think amazing work within one organization in 4 brands, is how do you make that 95% get better? And I think all of us here and many others have worked, and we'll talk about the policy and stuff like that, which we are imagining together. But I think the answer to your question is, we've had to bring visual effects supervisors from the Western world experienced and make sure that, they basically spread their knowledge here. So every department that we created, whether it was assets or animation or compositing, we brought a lot of folks from our ecosystem, our own company, who spent, between 6 months and 3 years and really built that talent around them. And I think that talent has created so many other studios today.
Right.
We walk around outside, we just meet colleagues and ex-colleagues, and I think the alumni is very powerful. Right. So what happens is that I think we still need the creative leadership to emerge locally because it builds talent pools around them. Right. And I think that's one of the big asks that we have of ourselves.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. Ashish, I want to kind of bring back a point that we were discussing at the back earlier, which is you're making this really great, interesting project on Adi Shankacharya ji. And I know that projects like those can involve a lot of challenges, budgetary challenges. So from an Indian perspective, how do you see the front end panning out for you as a producer, as a creator, as a leader of content, which you have been championing for a very long time in India?
Yeah, so, anything and everything that I'm doing right now, because I'm doing around 6 or 7 museums. And all these museums, we have experiential entertainment and immersive entertainment, and all of them require visual effects. And the challenges that one has is to really see that the writer and the directors that exist in our ecosystem today with their experience and wisdom, it's difficult for many of them to imagine as to how it would pan out if they have to actually live in the hands of, some of the visual effects, stuff. And I would say
you
that...
mean at the mercy of visual effects?
So it's about losing their control.
Yeah.
And, and for a long period of time, they don't get to see those images that they want to, because they see a grayscale, they see another version, they have to approve, they have to imagine a lot. But I believe that the concept artists are probably one of the finest, methods by which we can actually bring in a lot of convincing imagery, because a writer might have written or not, but a concept artist and a storyboard artist both can bring that to a very different level, right, where a director can then take a call of creating it. Only in the live action it was not possible, but now with the whole ecosystem, that is possibility. But what happens is that there were times, when I met Little Krishna, we required fur, water, hair, dust, everything. And we hardly had any artist. We had to learn it ourselves and make sure that we are doing. And luckily, it was a television show, but we still looked at the quality, which is very different. Today, the scenario is very different. But the challenge still remains that you need to really see that where have we come from? Because visual effects is 100% services business, to be precise. And your dependability is very high on the decision makers. And whether they are making a decision at the story level or they are making a decision after the shoot is done is also very important. At the same time, many of our studios are struggling with the fact that the shoot is done and some of the directors will come and say ki isme kuch kar do. So wo kuch kar do wala is a value addition that you are supposed to do, and then there's a limited budget and a time for that. Second is that when you start negotiating, many of them have come to terms now ki isko package kar do. In the sense that we want this much, but usko package itne mein package mein fill kar do. Now, you are at a very different creative stage, but what I am very happy about that India is one country where a Marathi film or a Bengali film can still be made in 1 crore and 2 crores and 3 crores and still have the visual effects that are done. And the same artist, actually when they work with a bigger budget film, they do, something very different. So you are in the ecosystem where you can actually look at a budget and still work out a good cinema. And if you're actually given a chance, you can actually do it much better. So it's about how to, become more important into the value chain is very critical. And I think with bigger studios, they have really done it very strongly, because many times they get paid on work per hour. And that's something where you can actually do a much, better result orientation than when you're pressed towards the package kar do. So I think we have to come a long way in those areas. And while coming into those, nitty-gritties, we have to ensure that we constantly educate the creators and the writers to think visual effects in mind when they are writing and planning. And those shots that they are not able to imagine right now to be, they only think in live action. So those shots that we can help them think in the breakdown. So many a times it happens that they have thought of only, 20% shots into visual effects, but it turns out that they end up doing 60% shots. So I think that gap needs to be, curtailed at this point in time. So we are in that kind of a threshold where we are struggling with those areas.
No, we've come a long way. And I think jumping off from your point about concept artists and that beautiful front-end imagery or coming up with that, I think, Biren, I want to jump to Pinocchio and stuff that I've recently been reading that you've shared and you're extremely proud of, as you should be. So can you talk a little bit about the Indian front-end stuff in that, and where do you see that heading for MPC?
So I think there is a growing tendency in global studios to view India a little differently, and they say that creativity is seeing what others see, right? And for us, the thinking is about what no one else can see. So visual effects can't be seen by the creator. We need to see his vision or her vision, and then we need to make sure we interpret that. So more and more, when work was coming in from big studios into India, they would have something called a hub team. So that was the hub, and we and maybe other parts of the world were the spokes that fed into that hub and did work that they parceled out. The hub is moving here. And in that sense, what's happening as a result is that we are breaking a status quo. In the local context that Ashish was talking about, I mean, Ashish is a very unusual person to make a movie because he knows this side of the fence. But most of the people who are making and imagining movies don't understand the other side of the fence and will not have the same facility that he has. And so the interpretation of dreams is really what we are talking about. How do you get the Western world and even accomplished Indian creators to take the risk of entrusting you to bring their dream to life? For most people today in India, even today, the visual effects is an interjection into how they actually make a movie come alive. Whereas the visual effects needs to be a synthesis that goes in from the very beginning. And I think that's the transition we are in. I believe 2022-23 is a really pivotal time because there is more and more on the screen. And I think from the point of view of the mindset in putting a movie together, in India we have generally given the largest single line item in the budget to stars. In perhaps 85% of the maybe 200 movies that we've done in visual effects in India with our Western counterparts in our company, I would argue that 95% of those movies, the visual effects is the single largest line in the budget. So we have the advantage, we do not get paid on a piece rate basis, we get paid on a fixed price, and I'm sure Jesh knows that very well, but it's also a package. Yes, we do get paid if there is a creative change.
Exactly.
But I think we need to make sure that the wonderful companies, many of whom have stands outside here, need to get a fairer share of the producer's budget in order to be able to deliver it. And they also need to scale, because when large movies in India that everybody in the room knows the names of are done by 12, 15, 18 studios, it's extremely difficult for the movie maker to find the consistency and the synthesis that we talk about. So scale is an important part of this whole story. And I think, tools and people don't realize how much of the visual effects company's budget, besides the wonderful work and what we do with training and creative, but technology is a very large cost item in that whole story, right?
Absolutely. And I think that kind of moves us right to where we wanted to was technology and tool development and mathematics and understanding of physics actually is such an important part of front-end ownership, so to speak. If you want to own that, we've got to understand that, we've got to develop that along with the creative talent. So what other in a sense impediments or hurdles that India needs to cross now to really start owning front end top to bottom? Ashish?
I think one of the most critical factor that we are looking at is making sure that the education system, like you talked about the dream, like you have a physics, chemistry, mathematics to go to engineering, physics, chemistry, biology to go to medical. We are really working hard today to see that the 6th grade onwards that the National Education Policy has allowed us to, put the creative programs. So we are in the process of defining that there is a pathway for students from 6th grade onwards. So we have created something called as Junior Media and Entertainment Creative Aptitude Test. And that can be taken and when you are in 4th and 5th grade and you select your programs and you create your pathway like, creating creative arts and performing arts and design to make a career into this space. So one is that we need to very systematically work with the central boards as well as the state boards so that there is an ecosystem that is developed. Second thing is that in the next 1 year, we are training 70,000 teachers out of Media and Entertainment Skill Council for the school ecosystem of CBSE alone. Now, this is a big task that we need to complete in the next, 10 months, because all these schools are now going to start these programs, but there has to be a trained faculty. And you cannot directly teach gaming or visual effects or animation to them. There is a progression from your, creative thinking, design thinking, and, ability to draw, to dance, to make faces, to make voices. And you actually gradually get into this ecosystem. Second is that the advanced education, what we say the higher education, also needs to be fine-tuned, because we are going to look at, the bottom of the pyramid coming from, informal education. And then you need to formalize them into making sure that you have a middle of the pyramid. Then you have to also select a pathway. Like when I get to studios and look at the artists, some of the artists are very, very good and they would like to make their growth definition by really looking at their leadership skill and their communication skill apart from what they own as a creative skill or technical skill or techno-creative skill. But many of them don't have, they are very inward looking, they are introverts, they don't want to communicate well, but their output is really good. So we need to really understand these, psychology of our artists and make sure that we guide them to go to the middle of the pyramid and the top of the pyramid. And I think that's going to remain very critical, according to me, as we move forward in the industry, that we need to look at the needs of every artist and make sure that we get a lot of people interested in making career, as I said, that bringing a level playing field along with science and commerce. So I think this is where the policy is going to work very strong. Of course, in terms of funding, in terms of making sure that the producer gets gets the incentive for making a visual effects movie, but that incentive truly should be passed on to the visual effects studio. That is not happening. So we need to, as an industry, work to make sure that the artist, at the end of the day, should get benefit of the whole incentive.
Absolutely. That policy level.
Can I just come back to the question and Ashish has given a fantastic, run. I just want to go back to this other point about, getting people to help us reach that level, that zenith.
Right.
So I think what visual effects has really done is to help people to think about defining more clearly the idea and seeing the movie outside of the director's head before the movie is made, right? As all of you know, when Favreau Disney and our MPC team worked, they locked the entire Lion King with controllers in a virtual platform. The entire movie was locked. So look at the efficiency of making it now.
Right.
Because now you're making, it was a visual effects company that made an animated movie.
Right.
Right? And I just wanted to tell you that I say this very often, that while we are all involved in entertainment, every single industry and every single application in this country requires the two things that we do. We do imagery and we do simulation. Doesn't matter if you're developing a new vaccine, it doesn't matter if you're ed tech, health tech, X tech, Y tech. You need imagery and simulation because that's informing everything that you do today, right? And I think the whole road and the journey to the metaverse, no matter whether you're the armed forces or whoever, is going to do exactly the same thing that we do in visual effects. One of my favorite, and I haven't answered your Pinocchio question, but one of my favorite shows from last year, that was actually made by Chand, who's sitting in the audience, was Prehistoric Planet, which was an Apple BBC show. It was 66 million years ago. And you have to imagine
What that was
66 million years ago. Now, front end, I mean, you can't have a better explanation of that because you have David Attenborough's voice and, people of that caliber who want to see the output, right? Or a new House of Dragons, which we created, which HBO, really spectacularly showed here. And I think I want to simplify this conversation because what we do in visual effects is really to make things like decode them. So when we cook a dish, and that's the answer to the question that you just asked, you first need an idea that I want to make a new kind of dish. Then you need a lot of chance to experiment.
First you got to be hungry,
And your customer is hungly.
Yeah,
You're making the dish. So you have ideas. You need to have a lot of different experiments you make you through. I was in the Bangalore airport yesterday, and there's this bartender who's teaching other bartenders with mocktails how to make a mocktail to make a cocktail, right? So they're making, they're throwing. That's a very important phase, by the way, in front end, to make and throw and then actually finalize it. Then you have the recipe. So that recipe is what currently the world sends as front end to us. So thinking of the idea, mixing these different things, like giving chance for experimentation, I would rather have funding for allowing people to experiment rather than giving them a fund to produce. Because if they have funding to experiment, like they have in many parts of France, if you go to Angoulême in France, where the comic book industry is huge, Angoulême is the world's biggest center for funding development and pre-production. And so that's the kind of thinking that we need to bring in if we really want to leapfrog the front-end story, because then cooking it and serving it is a relatively easier part, right?
So that brings me to a point that I think we all need to learn, and it's been a big part of my life, is failure. Is how do we encourage our artists, our community, our developers, our producers to fail? Because really that's where everything occurs, right? And what you're talking about is just that experimentation which will result in failure, but usually that results in either a reprimand or in embarrassment, and somebody just backs away and says, okay, I'm never experimenting again. So could you share?
Let Ashish go first, because I'm a two-time failed entrepreneur, which I'll come back to after he finishes.
I think one of my learnings in life so far is that you learn a lot from the failure. You become a much stronger person if you have failed. Because what I realized that it's a must in the life of every individual, and especially if you want to become an entrepreneur, you would respect people and money much better if you have failed in life earlier.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the criterias, of actually doing things better, because you will be able to take care of things in a much better way. Secondly, I think one of the learnings that I get from the failure is it develops in you an art of, self-motivation. Because if you have not failed, you will never be able to motivate yourself to get up and do something else or do it again and try it again. And I think that those are the two things in life which holds you very firmly as you grow up. Because as you start growing up and you actually start building bigger teams, you actually start getting more, aloof, and you become more lonely. And that's where your analytical skills would only be better, and your decision making will be far better if you have seen failures in life. So that's been my learning so far.
What about you, Biren? Failure and artistry and artists.
I will give this in two dimensions.
Yeah.
One is, I think a lot of people over here are studio folks, right? 95% of all of the animation companies that started 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago do not exist. So India is learning from failure. This is the first point I wanted to make. And what's the simple method? So you don't have to pay McKinsey $1 million. I'll give you the answer.
I don't have $1 million.
Having a studio, and all of us have been part of that, is if you need 5 things to go right. Creativity, which is talent. Technology. Production management, which is not easy when you're handling all those different iterations and frames. The human resource management, right? And finally, money management. So any studio or business is only as strong as the weakest of these 5.
Yes.
And for someone coming from a technology side, the other 4 is foreign language. Someone coming from a creative side, the other 4 is foreign language. That causes failure. So I think first of all, from a business point of view, since you're talking about how can we as a country go to the front end, we need to learn this lesson and capitalize it and make sure it works. From an artist point of view, I think what happens is that our system of our culture, because we are a developing country for 75 years, we do not tolerate failure. See, that guy's son did better than you. You have to study for your exam. We're not geared to be able to admit to failure. So we have a cultural problem in understanding failure, right? That stays with the 25-year-old or 20-year-old who's coming into the studio, because he actually has to hide anything that he or she is weak at.
Yeah.
So the test that Ashish talked about, which you want to do at the national level, 90% of the people that you and I have hired, 95% of people we've hired for potential.
Right.
We haven't hired because they are able to do what we have to make them do. Now, the failure happens when we are unable to tell them that they would be a better animator than a modeler, or a better modeler than a rigging guy. So I think we need to help the talent community to discover their path, because there's a huge amount of trajectory that's available in the 2D track, right? You can start somewhere in Roto and you can end up after X years as a compositor on a big Hollywood movie. So those pathways, I think, are beginning to become clearer to the talent. And I think anyone that works with talent to help them overcome their initial obstacles should keep selling them the dream of the journey which they have to go to. I think that would be a great takeaway from this conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's something for all of us to think about is how do we encourage failure in a sense, and how do we motivate those who have failed. There's another question that we were discussing earlier, was that, our talent started with roto paint, match move, moving into more complex work like assets and concept work is really up there. How do we move that talent base to the cream of work in visual effects, which is truly design and visualization and creating something no one's ever seen before. What's that journey going to be like for us over the next few years?
I think more importantly, as Biren said in the beginning, that, in our industry, 95% people work, learned everything on job. Whatever you may say, for a long period of time, that scenario is not going to change. Although we bring in formal education, we bring in courses, we bring in a whole lot of things, because the quality of faculty that we want to bring in is also going to be challenged. Because many people who have worked into the system will have to, make a decision of going and becoming a faculty. And luckily for us, we got a change made with UGC that the faculty of practice and, the professor of practice is allowed in our field. You need not have a PhD or a master's to teach, which all other verticals require. And I think that is going to make a sea change. Second thing is that we will have to encourage people that upgrading yourself in software alone, time and again, is not the learning process. It's an adaptation to the culture that is going to come, and that's the format that you need to work in. But to constantly look at learning process by learning new verticals as specializations is something that they need to identify and get into, building their career path. So one process is going to be internal, one process is going to be external, whereby we would influence all universities and all the school ecosystem to ensure that these courses are done. At the same time, the informal education that is happening in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, whereby there is a whole lot of interest that is getting created there, and that interest is getting transformed eventually, where people come from these smaller towns and villages into our ecosystem. I think both this will have to work parallelly for the next decade or so to get the right results. And I think the environment is just right. What we need to do within the job framework, I would leave Biren to
I think
answer
I'm being
that.
told that we're kind of out of time. So
I'll just finish this because we can't leave the design word hanging on the table. One of my favorite companies in India is Titan. And Titan is a company that actually from day one in its DNA built in the concept of design. They went to the Basel Fair, Xerxes Desai, the whole lot of folks, and they really made sure that they really changed the paradigm for wrist watches made in India. Once that culture was embedded in the organization, they could move to jewelry. And they made sure that they actually led that by design. Then they went from there to eyewear. And there's no limit to where they can go because it's done by design. I would like to say that the model for if I was to say what I want to achieve, which we're pretty close to doing for companies like ours and others that would, want to lead by design worldwide, is we're moving from being the outpost, the place where you outsource work to. You move from there, that's how everyone started. You move to being a satellite, where you say, I'm part of all the global studios, but I'm a satellite studio, right? And from there, you move to actually running a portfolio. So going forward, for example, everything that we do in games, we do in India, right? Now, that's not good enough. So we're now looking at, transformation. So there are, according to NASSCOM, 1,750 companies in India that are global capability centers for the top 500 companies in the world. So once we reach that level, we're end-to-end and we're leading. So effectively, the hub now comes here. And over time, we might have our own spokes, our own outposts in Vietnam or in Bangladesh, or I don't know where we'll have it. But,
or smaller Indian towns.
So that's where, but that is the leading by design. Because then we are actually imagining what we want to do and making sure that the implementation plays out. So you become the control tower from becoming, just the plane on the runway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, both of you. Do we have time for questions? No? Are we good? Okay, great. Well, That was wonderful, and thank you so much, both of you. Yeah.
Thank you, Jesh.